Hello and welcome to Education Marketer Live. I'm Kyle Campbell, the founder of Education Marketer, and today we are talking about content governance. Now, it's not a topic that gets a lot of airtime. In fact, it's normally something that's bolted onto the end of content marketing strategies, but that's not a very good way to be thinking about it. There's lots of opportunities to use governance and use it in a way that meets the needs of an organization and helps out the team putting it in place as well. And you'll quite often hear me on LinkedIn talking about the popular reasons that content strategies or approaches to content fail. And often I'll talk about things like consistency or lack of consistency and stakeholders not being aligned. But that applies to content overall. When we're looking specifically at enterprise organizations, large organizations, it isn't necessarily consistency or lack of alignment with stakeholders. It's often a lack of governance around content, processes, structure, and frameworks that causes an amazing idea to just completely fall down. So this stuff really matters. And joining me today to talk about that unique problem are two great people from Squiz. We have Ed Braddock, Chief Customer Officer, and Greg Sherwood, Chief Technology Officer. So both welcome to the show. It's really good to have you.
Great to be here, Kyle. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. I love a bit of governance. It's a bit of fun. I know it doesn't sound like fun on the surface, but it's actually a really meaty topic. And if you do it right, you can get a lot of rewards out of it, both for yourself, your team, and those other people who have responsibilities for content in the org. So let's have a bit of a dive here and just open out really with a bit of a definition to what governance is in 2023. So Ed, many perceive web governance as this massive tome, this huge document that sort of lands on a desk with a FUD. But really, it's many different things, and a lot of those things could be unspoken. It could be general wisdom about how the website operates. There's a lot of different perspectives on this. So can you give us a bit of grounding, please, in some of the ways you work with governance and the different forms that it can take?
Yeah, absolutely, Kyle. And I think you're right. I mean, it's not just a sort of a legacy set of rules and processes. It's absolutely, I think, ultimately about sort of enabling quality and even safety. So we think about security as well and underpinning there, and we'll probably dig into that, I'd say, during the course of the conversation. When we think about it in an education sector perspective, we've got organizations who are very reliant on their brand, on their reputation. And it's not just distributed authors that we see, but with the sophistication of experiences that are being built. There's sort of a whole range of experience builders across these organizations, across faculties, departments, out into the subsequent sort of research institutes even that are hanging off the sides. And so sort of within that environment, some of the customers we're working with have thousands of people that they're trying to orchestrate together to make these experiences. And they're filling a variety of roles, everything from people who are worried about the security, data sovereignty issues like that, through to the look and feel and the end user experience. So with so many people involved in actually building these experiences, governance is crucial. So I think that being able to represent single brand, single voice of an organization, a unified experience across all of the various digital channels as well, both sort of externally facing and internally. And then underpinning that, ensuring sort of stability, the safety of the systems, the data involved in delivering those experiences as well is crucial. So I think, governance itself is pretty broad, but ultimately, absolutely required in an HE organization to coordinate everybody involved.
It's really funny. When I was early in my career, I used to hear statements like, "Oh, there's thousands of people with access to the website," and it used to make me kind of fear, right? kind of turn pale, because that's so many variables. But
Absolutely.
today, it's very possible to have a set of governance that, I think saying it's invisible is a bit of a stretch, but a lot of solutions you're talking about there, that they are managed through technology, essentially, aren't they? So the things that people have access to in those various processes, that's right, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, and it doesn't need to be invisible. I think sort of having guide rails for people and providing room enough for them to be able to explore and create sort of modern digital experiences is really crucial. But knowing that there's a structure around them to do that, and as I say, guide rails to stay in place. I think some of the governance, and again, we'll probably talk to some of the detail of that, but some of that is clear and out there. So certainly around content, design guides, the tone of voice guides, those sorts of things, absolutely should be guiding our content creators. But underpinning that, that the systems in place for doing workflows and permissions and making sure those thousands of authors can't just all publish all at once, that we've actually got some structure underneath the hood to help ensure the end result is as consistent as we can get it, is crucial.
So, Greg, let's put another layer to this. It's often quite hard to get these systems and frameworks around governance prioritized in an organization, even though it does affect thousands of people. It's quite a bizarre problem, really. It's not given the importance it requires, and it affects so many and can help so many. A big priority in organizations is speed, and often the frameworks that go with that become secondary. And a very common problem that a lot of senior marketers face in universities is actually getting senior leaders to take an idea of governance seriously, because it's a very time-consuming project. It doesn't necessarily have an ROI attached to it. Well, maybe it does in a different kind of way, but it's not the kind of project you see a lot of people spearheading. It's usually more the campaign and the delivery side. So what's your opinion on that problem? And I imagine you've worked with any university clients in the past on getting these topics on the table and taken seriously before something goes wrong. So can you give me a bit of a dive into that and some of the approaches that senior marketers might want to take?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. It is something that can be forgotten, but it ties really nicely. The ROI thing is interesting. Might come back to that one. But the way I like to look at it, and I think we look at it with our customers as well, is they're building something. There's some experience they're building. It has a purpose for existing. They're trying to have it achieve something. They want to make that as good as possible for their customers. They want to be able to do that quickly, as you said, but they also want to be able to iterate quickly as well once they've got it out there, to be able to keep on achieving whatever goals they want to achieve. And there's a lot of things that can get in your way to making those two things happen. And governance sort of really sits there, I think, to protect you in those places of where things can go wrong. And so when I think about how do you get a senior team to take governance seriously, part of it is talking about what could go wrong, but also part of it is talking about how it can actually make you go faster and go better. So if you need to get customers to an outcome faster, right? So you've got students who are finding content, or they're trying to fulfill some process in a back-end system somewhere. Focusing on things like consistency of content, consistency of voice, accessibility even, and that might just be even accessing the system with whatever device in whatever way that they want to, is actually really important, because it gets this it gets this extra boost to these outcomes that you are trying to achieve. But equally, on the other side of, if you're trying to go really fast, then you can make mistakes, right? And that tends to happen at times, and some of them are pretty minor. Maybe you've got a piece of content that's slightly wrong, or it's slightly out of date, and you can fix it up very quickly. And some of them are pretty big, and they can lead to pretty drastic brand reputation damage. So obviously security issues, if you're moving personal data around and you're getting it out there, if it's got a data breach or something like that, that's a very serious consequence. A lot of the stuff that governance sits there, as Ed was talking about before, is really to protect, right, what you're doing, to let you move at speed to try and achieve outcomes that you're trying to achieve. And without having to constantly stop and slow down to just check everything, because everything's nicely in place, and without having to deal with the consequences of mistakes afterwards as well. So that sort of pitch to someone in a more senior position of, this is actually both protecting us, of course, but also this is the way that we do things fast and consistently, so that our brand is consistent, our message is consistent, our outcomes are achieved, all of the measurement, all of the logging around it, all of that sort of stuff is, I think, really important.
Really like that idea of almost having maybe even viewing it as like your digital assistant, so someone to kind of take care of all those little things that might slow you down. So for instance, if you're trying to put together some kind of website piece of content, a lot of the things that you would have to usually think about, you can take care of using governance to take care of those more niggles like tone and things like that. But you mentioned accessibility, that I find quite an interesting one. In your opinion, I think a lot of universities are trying to get ahead of this, try and get on top of this and take it more seriously, but I still see a lot throwing up graphics on the website with text on them, and those basic sort of things that kind of break those rules. Where do you think we are as a sector? Do you think we talk a good talk about accessibility, but when it comes to it, it's maybe a little more difficult for us? You know, where do you think those challenges are, and how do you think governance specifically can help us get over that hump?
Yeah, it's a good. It's not all talk, but there's definitely a big challenge there, right? So if we have our accessibility audit tool that runs over, the site or something, can pick, like other ones as well, pick out hundreds of thousands of issues that have been really probably there for 10 plus years, right? And then compounded over time. It's like, well, how do I solve this problem? And it's easy enough to go now and say, well, in hindsight, we should have had more governance over things like design system and tone and brand and all that kind of stuff. But you kind of are where you are. But I think it's a solvable problem, right? And I think by putting pieces of governance in place, it's actually the perfect time to put pieces of governance in place as well. Because if you look at 200,000 issues and you think that's 200,000 things I've got to do, it's not actually true, right? So you might clear, you fix one thing up, it appears on every single page, it might be 1,500 issues. So maybe instead of going and just changing that one thing, you can also have a look at how did it get there, and is it is that something that I can put into a shareable component or something like that I can use, so I don't have to worry about it, I can centrally manage it. And a lot of that centralization of things is really important. Part of accessibility is fixing, but then also part of it is making sure that it's easy to achieve that. Right. So one of the things we have this, internally when we do accessibility in products, and there's one direction where you just teach everyone everything about accessibility and they all become experts and then they don't make any mistakes. Or there's the other direction which we go in, and I think everyone else should go in as well, which is you just assume people are going to make mistakes if you don't provide them the tools. So provide them the tools and the guide rules, like the guide rails, like Ed has said. Make it easy for them to do things the right way. I think it's kind of an important bit of governance. I think governance works best when the most obvious way to do something is the way that you should do it, rather than some convoluted set of like 12 different steps. And it's like, well, that's the process. So if you can say, well, what would they do in this case? Or they'll put that thing and they want to put a design template on or something like that, and that's already nicely taken care of, and they're not going to get confused by accessibility issues or something like that, then you're going to get a better result overall.
It's funny, isn't it? It's almost like it removes steps. Sorry, Ed, please come in.
Yeah, no, look, that just triggered for me that I think, because there's sort of governance in my mind up front, the things that you do for the actual creation of the experience. And so thinking about accessibility as the example there, we've got accessibility tools built into the editing and the page building experience. So individual page creators, content creators can actually sort of run those, check that as they're actually creating that content object or page, whatever that might be. But that, and so that's where Greg's talking to, isn't it? That you're simplifying that as much as possible. It's just part of that workflow. The feedback from that sort of tool should actually be an education piece rather than a wrap over the knuckles. So you're actually trying to help people understand what they're doing and why. And so actually feeding, even, we try and feed those accessibility reports back in a human understandable way and our interpretation of them rather than just straight guidelines. But then at the other end, after you've created, it's this sort of post area where really you've got to use auditing and have that as part of your standard workflows as well. So I think the other end of it Greg's talking to is our accessibility checker that actually runs across your entire web sort of property and portfolio and feeds back. And I was going to say that is a good way of getting a senior manager's attention, is to throw one of those reports in front of them showing lots of red. And also those reports are really important that you're tracking over time, that you can see progress, you can sort of see burn down that's built into them. and the teams themselves should be celebrating that they're actually affecting change.
I can speak from experience that some of those reports, they are quite terrifying. They come back with like, oh, you have 1 million errors that you they're all marked as red. And you are right. There is a degree to which that kind of helps you get on the table in an organisation for senior management. There are some organisations as well that the names escape me of them, but they produce almost like league tables for accessibility, which I remember when they used to come out, it was a bit of a nightmare for digital teams. I used to speak to other colleagues at other universities and other web managers, and they'd be going, oh, here it is again. It's that time of year.
Name and shame.
It's important, right?
Yeah, that's not always a good. I think we prefer the carrot than the stick, but
rather than the unrelenting pressure of another league table. So we've spoken a little bit about workflows and processes. Ed, these are kind of almost like the basics of governance, but I imagine there's quite a bit that's overlooked or maybe not thought about as part of governance. So could you perhaps take us through some of the areas that you think deserve more attention when it comes to the governance process, and some unlikely areas that some newer web managers might not have thought of?
Yeah, for sure. I think, look, a fundamental one, it might seem minor, but just in terms of onboarding and offboarding staff, actually ensuring who's on the books. We do see some organizations getting quite complicated and probably sometimes overly complicated in their sort of permissions model and who can access what and who can do what. So I think both auditing those permissions models, but also just ensuring that staff are brought in. Part of that onboarding should obviously be getting the permissions set up in the right to the right levels, but also the education piece. So introducing them to the workflows. This is how we create content. This is the style guides. We've seen really impressive uses of building those sort of tone of voice and style guides into the content creation process itself. So particularly quite a few of our customers use internal metadata schemas. So as they're creating a new page of a particular type, there'll be internal metadata attached to that page that they can see through the publishing tool that actually gives them guidance as to what that page should be about, depending on its level in the IA, whether it's a landing page versus a content page, that sort of thing. So I think, there's those sorts of tools that your staff need to be aware of as they're coming on board. Obviously, at the other end, offboarding, making sure as staff are leaving the organisation, we're doing the right things there and cleaning up after they go. Ensuring that people take their roles on. So, there's workflows in place. Who's actually going to fill those moderation positions that were there previously? So I think that's an important flow. I think the other one that we see is around system duplication. So we're very aware these days that pretty much anyone within an organization with a credit card can sign up for the latest and greatest SaaS tool. So, solving a particular point in time problem. And the next thing we know, we've got a proliferation of these tools with individual user accounts against them, and trying to then tie those together into some sort of consistent user experience, let alone the headache of what the organization signed up for, is a problem. So I think keeping track of that. Ultimately, I think we find the answer to that, and I think Greg's already covered it, is providing those end users with the right tools to do their job and making sure that they're feeling tooled up and capable, and not needing to just go off and grab something off the shelf to solve that. If they do, there obviously needs to be a process around that. What problem are they actually trying to solve? And let's think about what's in place for it. And I think just finally, the other thing that we probably does get overlooked, we've just spent a bit of time talking about accessibility there and auditing, but I think auditing in general, there's lots of really good tools out there. I mean, we definitely build stuff into our platform to do this as well, but checking reading age, checking performance of pages, obviously accessibility, SEO, auditing, those sorts of things, should be getting run on a regular basis. And teams actually, as I say, ultimately celebrating, the success that they're actually moving in the right direction and improving, continuously improving end user experience.
When you mentioned internal metadata, I think this is quite an intriguing topic. So you did mention the kind of way that someone's creating a page, but you also said that there's a way to put instructions, not instructions, I want the right word, but where this content should fit, what it should look like. From a user perspective, what does that look like? Just take me through what an interface might look like if someone wants to create a piece of content at a certain level.
Yeah, well, so what it can look like and does look like for some of our customers is around both at the component level that they're using within our page builder. So as you're pulling a component in, you can have sort of essentially tooltips there, or cheat notes as to how to best use this particular component. So that might be like an accordion on a page, or a banner, or a more functional item like a contact us form. All of those things to us are sort of components that you're utilizing to build up that end user experience. So definitely embedding helpful sort of tips within those components themselves, and that can be controlled by the developer who develops those, or even added over the course. But then when we think about our design systems and the templates that we're using, so the actual layout of pages, at that level, we're used to external metadata, so information about that particular page that's then made public, usually through the source code of the page and for SEO and those sorts of things. But you can just as easily have internal metadata that doesn't actually make its way out to that public page, but lives with that page within your systems, and so you can actually, you can set that up as guidelines for a user. Or for the content creator to actually be following. And the system knows, is this page at a landing page level? Is it at a content, down a couple rungs in your IA content level? And so those instructions, we can do it at a template level, so they'll appear depending on what type of page that is. So
that seems like such a simple thing to do, and yet I don't see that as often on CMSs as I'd like, and usually you're right as well. The number one people go to is the permissions, and they assume if someone doesn't have access to do something, that to a certain extent it does protect the organization, but actually having that plus guidance all built in, independent of having to get in touch with a human for consistent training and all that sort of thing all the time, I think it's really valuable. I don't see the tips and the guidance on that stuff very often. So that's a really good piece of advice. And I imagine a lot of teams benefit from that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because that's right. And it depends on who's, it could be different roles, accessing different levels of those pages. But yeah, having that actually there as part of your editing experience, rather than, as you said, sitting on the tome on the shelf that you're not actually going to pick up every time you edit a page, is really helpful. Yeah.
Get that massive book out the drawer again, right? Yeah.
That's right. Well, hopefully it's at least a PDF somewhere, not printed.
At least hopefully it's digital, at least somewhere. Yeah. Greg, let's have a chat about actually putting some of these things in place and implementation. I think a lot of the time governance is almost viewed as this thing you tick off the lists, and okay, that's good, at least it's been on a list in the first place. But I think in order to maintain it, and in order to make sure it keeps alive, there is an element of how it's implemented. And as someone who's gone into universities and helped them do these sort of projects, and they are quite chunky, what's your general approach, advice? Are there any pitfalls that you've come across in the past that you could share here today that people could avoid in the future? What's your take on getting these things done?
Yeah, actually, Ed mentioned one just before. Don't go and write it all down and then put it somewhere and tick it off. Right. So that's actually probably a waste of time to start there. I would say the very first thing is you need to get started, right? But then knowing where to start is important. So we've talked about auditors a lot. It's a bit of a recurring theme. They're really important because if you're not starting from scratch, how do you know where you're at? So I think before you can start to manage the process of putting governance in place and getting yourself into a better state, you need to be able to measure where you are today, and then be able to measure your pathway to success as well. And auditors are absolutely terrific for that. In fact, they're kind of essential for that. I think that's probably the main way that you're going to find out whether you're making a difference. So definitely figure that out. Where are you at? Start auditing. And as I said before, celebrate the wins that you that you achieve as well. I think that's really important. And then just try and tick things off. And so one of the things that, just thinking back to a recent memory, and that one about accessibility, it wasn't just about accessibility. I've had a university that I was sitting with who had accessibility and reading age and tone and spelling mistakes and the works, right? And it was mammoth. And the PM that I was talking to there had started to put together a project plan that went for multiple years, right? Because how do you possibly achieve that? And so looking at it and sort of figuring out, and you said before, Kyle, as well, everything is high priority, right? They're all just like all reds and ones. So really having a look at what is important for you to achieve, having a look at what are some of the most common places that your customers access, right? What are the things that are going to give you the most benefit? You should definitely start there and try and put some things in place. So things like design systems, Ed mentioned as well, right? Components, centralization, some tooltips and documentation that are in line there. Just start to litter a few things in and then see if you can measure the actual impact of that. It's the same way that you would go about kind of testing the experience that you're building. If you're running an A/B test or something like that, you'll try something out, you'll measure the success of it, and if it worked, great, keep it in there and keep going. If it doesn't work, change tack, but you've just got to keep on iterating. I think the mistake to make would be to plan everything out, try and put everything in place as a big project, and then get to the very end and do a big bang release. By the time you do that, it's way too late. Everyone's forgotten about it, and it's probably massive. So don't do that. The other thing probably not to do is like lock down real tight, like make some absolute massive changes. Ed mentioned the credit card and the sort of like whatever SaaS product you want. It's very real though, right? Like everyone has that. That proliferation of systems is incredibly common in the education sector, and some of them are homegrown and some of them are purchased, and then some of them are sort of hidden, right, from all different sort of things like that. But they're not done maliciously. There's people that are trying to get the job done, and they feel blocked or slow at every point, and they're just trying to figure out how to get it going, right? So they're looking for the path of least resistance. And if you've just put a massive number of blockers in just in case, and you've changed life on them so much, they're going to, again, not maliciously, right? But you're just going to end up pushing them in a different direction. And you've actually made life worse for yourself because they're not going to tell you what they're doing. They're going to hide that. And you're going to run your reports and say, well, nothing's working, right? And so you just need to be a bit careful, I think, about that.
Yeah, that credit card problem is very real. And especially, I love how some SaaS products, it's so easy how to use them as well. So you just embed it on the website. I hate it's just as easy as embedding it on the website, right? I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is, right? But yeah, these are very real challenges. Interesting thing you said, and I want you to link back to an earlier point you made right at the beginning of the session. You spoke about measurement and looking at the impact of the things you put in place, and you said you had a perspective on ROI. Take me through that, because I think we don't often look at governance as a measurement like you would a campaign, like an ROI. So how would you structure something like that?
Yeah, I think it's thinking about it's. I sometimes see this actually where people have built things, and there was definitely no one builds a digital experience for fun, right? Or a website just for fun or something like that. Like there's obviously a purpose for it. But we can forget why it exists while you're in the day-to-day toil of just trying to keep the thing going and pumping content out. Like there's actually things that you are trying to make available for students and staff and prospective students and whoever it happens to be, right? So, and you can lose sight on that of that. But if you can measure that and you can put that in place, and that's going to help you for a range of different things, not just governance, by the way, right? That's amazing stuff. But if you think about that, then you would look at governance as impacting ROI either positively or negatively. And one way of, I guess, looking at it is to go all the way to the extreme and just say, well, what if you landed on a university website you're thinking about maybe going here? It's littered with spelling mistakes. Every page looks different. The logo's half cut off. The page takes 4 seconds to load. right? Are you going to, like, it doesn't matter how well. Some universities might scooch there on their brand, right? But otherwise, it's not going to matter what your actual university offers or anything like that. You're just going to get disregarded. The industry is too competitive. So by putting those things in place and making it really easy to achieve things like brand consistency, discoverability, SEO, accessibility, that sort of thing, you're actually really helping your ROI, whatever you've set. Those outcomes are being measured, hopefully, at a higher rate because of that, right? But even if you can't see it directly, right, there's still that element of it's protecting it from going down, right? So there's lots of ups and downs in the industry, right? And even for universities we've talked to over the last few years and other higher education institutions who are not seeing rapid growth, right? They're not seeing the decline that some others would. And so that's actually a really important success story for them, ultimately in some of the locations that they're in. And it's because they've got more of a control over of their message, their brand, the way they are talking to their prospective customers as well. So that's important. You don't always see it, especially in times of like high prosperity, but it doesn't take too much in a competitive market to have the impact there, and it doesn't take too much to degrade and introduce all this sort of debt over time, and then you look back at it and go, well, where did things go wrong? It was probably years and years ago, and now you've got really quite a path ahead of you.
That's a good point, Greg. Sorry, Carl.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just I'm just thinking of a few of our customers actually, and even with the COVID impact there, and one in particular who responded extremely quickly and got sort of a custom student interface up to lead their students, provide them direct updates as to exactly what was going to happen for them, which courses they were going to be able to do online, those sorts of things. But it was actually probably the governance, the fact that they could get access to the right templates, the look and feel of that. It all felt quite seamless from a student perspective in this sort of moment of turmoil. They got this system up within 2 days, fully integrated into their back-end business systems, CRM, all of that. But from I suppose the tone of voice, the look and feel, the way that looks to the end student are feeling supported at that point. And I mean, I think it's an amazing story for those guys and how they managed it. But, it's the controls around that and that they had the right tools, but also the right practices in place to do that extremely quickly and not have it look disjointed or feel rushed or hurried. It actually was part of their broader digital landscape.
I think 2 days is really impressive. And is that specific? Is that like that's governance, obviously, but it's like a window of governance, isn't it? It's like focusing on a specific area, right?
Yeah, that's right. Well, it's essentially it was a one-page sort of app, essentially. Yeah, sort of a complex form that was able to go and pull information in from a couple of different sort of student management systems and CRM, and be able to present that back to the student as they logged in. Yeah,
it doesn't have to be complicated, does it? I think you have to. It's very easy to think about these as huge overarching projects. These are big chunky things, but if you look at a single use case like that, you could actually achieve something quite meaningful in that short window of time. I want to build on this point of view, Si, because as we look to the future and where the way we approach governance goes, my instincts would probably suggest that because things are getting faster, technology is moving at a crazy pace. Look at how AI has developed over the last year or so. There's so much disruption that it's very hard to find the time to build out an overarching governance project. So what's your take on that situation? Do you think the way we approach governance and the management of content and organizations will have to evolve or have to change? And if it does, where do you think that will go? What do you think those processes will look like?
Yeah, look, I absolutely. I think, I mean, you mentioned AI. Obviously, we're all watching in terms of impact there and what's going to happen. I certainly think in terms of auditing much, or automating, much of this auditing that we're talking about, those processes themselves really being able to efficiently sort of pick up issues, but not just the issues. I imagine, these again, the accessibility report with 200,000 errors, it'll be much cleverer at being able to get to root cause very quickly. We know ourselves that we dig into those and can find those. But I imagine that, that governance layer, I suppose, the auditing piece, definitely be taken care of in a more clever and automated way. I definitely looked at growing number of systems and complexity of tools. So we've mentioned the credit card and those tools. Ultimately, we do actually need to empower teams to be able to pull in new tools as they're coming along. And there are some really clever MarTech tools out there, these point solutions to particular problems that we want to encourage our teams to be able to do. And that's certainly an underpinning promise of our platform, actually, in this whole composability piece, where we expect teams to be able to plug those into a central platform that provides the governance layer. So from a technology perspective, we have one place that we're looking at to audit the use of those, control permissions, even consider security from one location. So I think that's the future of the sort of the DXP platform from our perspective. I think certainly the tools being more catered for the particular roles across the organizations as well. And I think we've talked already to how we can start to build some smarts into even editing interfaces to help, content authors or page builders as they're working on their jobs. But really acknowledging that, across building a digital experience, you've got, developers there creating components and back-end code. You've got marketing teams looking at, the individual pages and what's required there. Content editors composing pages, pulling in those components as well, but obviously focusing on the actual content and great content. The designers are doing look and feel. You've got UX teams around the UX experience, and then you start to get into even moderators, your legal teams getting involved in the content that's being pushed out. I think getting more specialized in terms of how each of those roles is fulfilled and come together around building the digital experience. And I think, ultimately being able to create these experiences quickly, fast, getting them out there, proving what's working and being able to iterate on that while orchestrating, again, these thousands of people involved in that. If we really want that sort of efficiency to be able to move at that speed, I think we're going to have very ways of personalizing, I suppose, the internal experience for our users within the organizations themselves. So I think that certainly will be a big part of the future.
And what about you, Greg? What's your sort of view of the future, and where's the sort of essential areas for web managers to be looking?
Oh, I'll talk about AI all day if you want me to talk about it, but it's a tooling. Yeah, it's a tooling thing, right? And it's exactly what Ed said. So I'm actually quite strongly agree, and I think there's a lot of toil around the place of trying to figure things out and just make corrections and things like that. Providing, I think tools will appear that make that easier, so that you don't have to worry so much about that. And you're sort of like putting testing in. I'm obviously an engineer, so putting testing in if you're a developer or something like that, right? It's the things that are there to catch you when you make those mistakes. And I think it's easy. There'll be tools there to catch it easier, fix it for you faster, so that you can focus on actually producing things. So hopefully governance tools become advanced enough that they increase the speed at which you can move, right? Which is going to be, as you said, ever increasingly important, but also in a world where you've got all of that tech floating around. And that shouldn't be seen as a bad thing. That's a good thing. You've got all the stuff that you need, but now you need to manage a lot of things. So that's where I think it's going as well.
Good stuff. Thank you both very much for coming on today. I really enjoyed having a bit of a focus session on governance. It's not something that gets a lot of attention. Well, it does when something goes spectacularly wrong, but it's good to talk about a bit of preemptive strikes or here and getting like a sense of what's important. And we've mentioned speed quite a few times as well. And often these projects are viewed as something that slows down progress and inhibits people to move quickly, but you've definitely both tapped into how it can open up those options and make things more usable for the user, but also faster and more convenient for those who create and publish that content at scale. So thank you both for coming on. Ed, where's the best place to get in touch with you if people want to follow up?
Yeah, absolutely. LinkedIn, just Edward Braddock. There's not that many of us globally, so please reach out and find me there.
How many are you competing with? I mean, I've got a lot of Kyle Campbells, most of them living in the US for some strange reason.
Well, I've actually got, well, LinkedIn is just /Edward Braddock, so all one word, so that's easy to find.
What about you, Greg? Is the same, yeah?
Yeah, but you won't find me at Ed Braddock. You'll find me at Greg.
There's only one Ed Braddock. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much both for coming on. No doubt I'll speak to you again in the future. And yeah, take care of yourselves. Thanks for your contributions today.
Thanks, Carl. It's a great job. Cheers.